in Higher Education is a 25-year-old nonprofit higher ed adjacent institute. Our goal is to partner with institutions and other entities to improve outcomes like graduation and receiving a credential. We do this through working with teaching, learning, retention, and completion. In other words, we help institutions meet your students where they are and then help them to move toward life-changing opportunities like that diploma or the credential. Throughout this webinar, you're going to hear a little bit from me, my colleague, Ms. Katie Locke, who is the Director of Marketing and Communications and Engagement. And you'll hear from me. I am, again, Felita Williams. I'm the Senior Vice President for Programs. And I actually have the pleasure of working on both of the programs you're going to learn more about. So we're going to introduce the team that's going to talk with you today. Dr. Gardner is going to join us toward the end, and so we'll introduce him there, and he'll make some comments. But right now, I'm going to ask my colleagues who are going to talk today to do a 2 to 3 minute self-introduction of each other, of themselves. We're going to start with Dr. McGillen. We'll go to Dr. Newman, and then to Dr. Koch. Dr. McGillen.
Thank you, Felita. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vicki McGillen. I'm an Associate Vice President here at the Gardner Institute, and I'll be having the opportunity to share with you about the Chief Academic Officer community, innovation community, that we have now run 4 cohorts of Chief Academic Officers. I come to this work having served as Chief Academic Officer at 2 independent universities, one in Oregon and one in Ohio, but I have also served in the Provost office and as a Dean in public higher education as well. So I come with the experience in both the public and the independent sector. I'm also particularly concerned about the role of Chief Academic Officer because, as I found once I entered that role myself, it is one of the loneliest jobs in higher education. And this is a unique opportunity for a cohort of Chief Academic Officers to come together to build trust and community, to both learn about driving innovation and promoting innovation for themselves and their campuses, but also to come away with a cohort of trusted colleagues with whom they can share their issues. I look forward to talking with you more about this later.
Dr. Newman.
Yeah, thank you, Felita. And hello, everyone. Scott Newman. So I began my career as a faculty member and have spent most of my 25 years in higher education in a variety of different leadership roles, including assistant dean, dean, provost, and campus president of different campuses of the Oklahoma State University system. Excuse me. I had multiple opportunities to work with several different Gardner Institute representatives, both staff and fellows, on different initiatives when I was a provost. And about 1.5 years ago, I returned to the professoriate and am absolutely delighted to be with you today to talk about the Gardner Institute's new and, in my opinion, much needed community of practice for academic unit leaders. And I look forward to sharing that with you in a little bit.
Thanks, Scott. And I believe I pick it up from here. Colleagues, my name is Drew Koch. I am very pleased to be able to join you today and in just a little bit share some context around why we're coming together, why we're doing what we're doing, some of what we may do in the future that we're not quite offering just yet, but how our experience at the Institute over 25, coming up to 26 years, has shaped and informed both the work we're doing now and work we will be doing. I've been involved in education since 1992. I spent a solid and formative year as a secondary ed teacher, and then through, it's a surprise to me, through serendipity, wound up getting involved in summer bridge programs, which led me to work in post-secondary ed going forward. So for about the past 30 years, I've been working on higher ed access, success, learning, and completion efforts. I was fortunate in 1993, 1994, 1995 to be one of John and Betsy's students. I worked for almost 20 years thereafter in colleges and universities, three specific institutions at the time: University of Richmond, Hofstra University, and for the longest period of time, 13 years at Purdue. And then in 2010, came back to working with John and Betsy, although I'd never really left them, as a full-time staff member at the Gardner Institute. I held various roles over that period of time, and in 2021 was named its Chief Executive Officer. So really thrilled to be working with you all. I would think one of the most consistent lessons learned throughout that experience is that leadership truly matters. I've learned that both with work institutions. I've learned that with work with our own board and the way they've invested in me as a leader. And so I'm glad to be with you now and share a bit about how we're learning in and investing in leaders across higher education broadly. So, and Katie, you totally read that segue very well. You're a rock star. So, the title of this included the phrase transformative leadership, and the term transformation, or the phrase transformative education, is sort of bandied about higher ed. It's almost become cliche, yet we're sticking with it. And why? We're sticking with it because we truly believe in it and what it means to us. And I want to spend a little time right here and now defining that. For purposes of all of our work at the Gardner Institute, transformation means changing higher education so that every learner can complete a high-quality credential or degree, right? Every learner can graduate. Now, I have had some people push back and say, well, that doesn't uphold standards if every student gets a degree. I didn't say every student gets a degree. I said every student can earn a degree. There must be high expectations on students. And there must be high expectations on institutions. And often, my dear faculty and staff colleagues are sometimes quick to point out high expectations for students. But when we analyze institutions, units, departments, we realize that sometimes the lens we apply to student has not been applied to our own organizational structure. And that when one does so, it can be particularly challenging. And so that's where the Gardner Institute has really leaned into transforming institutions so every student can graduate. Now, that is a goal. There has to be a means to doing that. And the means for doing that are identifying context-specific innovations that collectively put together lead to better outcomes, right? The goal is every learner can graduate. The means is what innovative practices are you using or should you be using to do that? And with that, what sort of capacity needs to be developed within leaders in order to lead that innovation and change over time? So that's why we're leaning into this now, because it doesn't happen in the absence of leaders. But I'll be forthright with you. With my 3 degrees in history, as much as I studied leaders and leadership movements, I never had a formal experience until after I got done with my PhD that focused on leading change in higher education institutions and in systems. So we're leaning in here, particularly on the student success front or piece. On the next slide, you'll see a few ways that we can support development for that, or at least a prompt that prompts me to tell you about some of those ways, right? And we're going to actually spend time, as Scott and Vicki shared earlier, really delving into 2 of them. But the Gardner Institute has recognized, as I mentioned to you earlier, that we have to invest in leaders to help them yield the outcomes they hope to see, to lead the change they hope to see at their institutions, right? We have to invest time, energy, and effort, or institutions have to do that, and we can be a party that helps them do so, right? We recognize, and we've done work with the Association of Governing Boards to really work with governing boards, presidents, and cabinets to focus on more transformational change, appropriate governing board involvement in that, right? This info session isn't about that, but that is one area where we've done leadership and will continue to do leadership work around leading transformational change in higher education. Another area where we're developing that is specifically a community of practice for presidents new presidents, but also established ones, right? However, what we're here to talk about today are two very specific forms of work that we are doing. One is focused on leading in academic units. This could be chairs, heads, directors, whatever verbiage you use at your institutions for those who lead academic units. Heavy emphasis on academic departments or units, but it doesn't only have to be there, right? But I'm emphasizing that because far too often academic leadership are wonderful, wonderful scholars, they're wonderful, wonderful teachers, but they hadn't been prepared necessarily on how to lead in on leading units like that, and specifically how to lead transformational student success efforts from the role of the chair, the department head, et cetera, right? And that's where the Gardner Institute has expertise. I'm pleased to say, alluded already, I dropped the fact that I'm a history type, right? Truth be told, an American Studies history type. That's a conversation for another day about the distinction between that and just history, right? But we're not going there now. What I will say is we have good collaboration with the American Historical Association, strong support and collaboration with Jim Grossman, the executive director there, and the staff at the AHA over almost a decade now. And I've been fortunate to join them in their new chairs and department head meetings that have happened in July in Chicago, at least the past few years they have. They do a wonderful job getting at a lot of aspects, administrative aspects that history heads or chairs need to undertake, but they can't delve into the complexity of student success work. That's why we're doing this here, right? Because no organization alone, even discipline-specific organization alone that we're aware of has been able to really delve into this in the way that's necessary given contemporary trends and challenges and opportunities in higher ed today. Another area where we have deep experience, I believe we might be going to our fifth cohort, and what we're talking about in this is to really work with chief academic officers and help them become chief innovation officers, particularly around academic innovation at their institution, right? My colleague, Vicki McGillen, Dr. Vicki McGillen, when I'm not being nice, is going to spend a lot of time talking about what we learned and what we are doing with cohorts of 6 to 12 CAOs over the course of a year to do this work. Now, it can be a little bigger than that. I'm not limiting on size, but it's been around there over the past few years. So these are two of the experiences we'll talk about now. I mentioned a few others. Stay tuned for informational overviews on them in the future. But for right now, we're really here to talk about leading academic units for optimal student success and learning outcomes, and also the CAO as a chief innovation officer around student success and student learning as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it back, I believe, to Katie.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you very much. As I listened to what you were saying, the phrase that really stuck with me was investing in leadership. And both of these opportunities invest in institutional leadership. As my colleague Vicki said, as I became a provost, you're right, it becomes, you don't realize what a lonely job it is until you're there. And having an opportunity to have a community to meet with and talk with and, share your things that are going well, things that are not going so well, it's a privilege that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to do. And so these two opportunities, I think, invest in leadership at our institutions. So I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Newman and let him talk a little bit about what we're doing with leading academic units.
Yeah, thank you, Felita. Katie, you want to go on the next slide? So really delighted to get to partner with some amazing folks on this important work. Many of you are already familiar with Felita, Senior VP for the Gardner Institute, who we met earlier, if you aren't already familiar with her. Also engaged in this work are Paul Laporte. Paul's Associate Dean in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Arizona State University, and Suzanne Wilson Summers, she's the Chief Academic Officer with the College of Southern Maryland. So we have a really interesting diversity of institutional backgrounds and perspectives that's involved in developing this specific community of practice. All of these individuals have been amazing resources, are amazing resources, and have been truly terrific partners. And I'm really delighted to get to work on this project with them. Can you go to the next slide, please? So here's a listing of the, I guess I would describe as a list of participant outcomes that we have projected for this particular community of practice. I'm not going to read it to you because I don't love being read to as far as PowerPoint slides are, but in essence, most of us are well aware that higher education, our colleges and universities, and of course, in turn, their academic leaders are under significant pressure to improve the success of our students. And because of the nature of the work, our work in higher education, much of our work in student success inherently occurs at the academic unit levels. We also know, as Drew pointed out a moment ago, that many academic leaders don't undertake their roles fully equipped to lead that kind of work. So the purpose of this community of practice is to support individuals who are leading academic units and faculty in developing, launching, and sustaining student success initiatives that relate to their specific units, their specific student populations that they serve, and their institutional context, which we all know can vary dramatically across our different colleges and universities. In addition, of course, as Vicki pointed out with the Chief Academic Officer Community of Practice, participants also will develop rich relationships with other academic leaders who are also engaged in the critical work of student success and who will also serve as wonderful resources for one another. Can we go to the next slide, Katie? So the way the structure of this community practice is, there'll be we'll have monthly meetings. We'll have an in-person kickoff session that will occur in conjunction with or as a pre-conference workshop in conjunction with the Gardner Institute's Fall Symposium that will take place on October 31st. So we'll be kind of on the front edge of that wonderful professional development opportunity. So I hope many of you will be able to attend, whether or not you're able to participate in this community of practice. Again, really focused on helping chairs and academic leaders, and we'll talk about the audience in a moment, but we really want them to be able to focus on their respective contexts and the challenges that they face in those particular roles, and obviously the challenges that their students face. And then again, opportunity to work collaboratively with people facing similar challenges. Can we do the next slide, please? Here's a listing of the different sessions. So there's an initial session. That's the orientation and the session that's part of that pre-conference workshop. And then there will be 7 subsequent sessions. And here's a listing of the different major focuses of those sessions. Next slide. So this particular community of practice is really for individuals who currently provide leadership to academic colleges, departments, schools, other types of academic units. So this includes deans, department chairs, as Paul likes to say, adjective enhanced deans and adjective enhanced chairs. So associate and assistant deans, associate and assistant department chairs, school heads, program directors, leaders in similar roles or individuals who lead student success initiatives within academic units, so are involved with faculty and leading faculty, are also welcome to sign up for this particular community of practice. So the kickoff will be in October as a part of that pre-conference workshop for the Fall Symposium. We'll have 7 subsequent sessions taking us through June. Right now, we have planned for those to occur between 3 and 4:30 Eastern time. So they'll take about 90 minutes from beginning to end. The first virtual session, I say monthly, but because the first orientation, that orientation introductory session takes place on October 31st, that first session will actually take place in December, right as we're all beginning to wrap up semesters and head off into the holiday sunset. I think that wraps up the main pieces of that.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate that. I'll just talk a little bit about the process for joining the community and the fees. So the fees are $4,445 for the year. That does include the registration for that pre-conference workshop as well as the symposium. So that is included in those fees. So you have kick off with that great professional development experience. It does not include the travel or the lodging for that conference. So you would be responsible for that. The registration, we will send out a link to register for this experience. Tomorrow, we'll send out the recording for this and the link to register for that. Once you're registered, you'll get an information sort of survey from the facilitators, which will sort of ask you about what you're hoping to gain and really make sure that they're aligning the curriculum of the course with the needs of the participants. So thank you, Scott. If you have any questions, please go ahead and post those in the chat and we'll make sure we get to those. And now I will pass this back to Dr. Williams.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Locke. Thank you, Katie. You know, once we invest in leadership for the leads of our academic departments, the person best positioned to give them support is that CAO, the Chief Academic Officer, or the Provost. And helping the Provost and CAO to see new possibilities, to be innovative, and wrap their arms around that team. That's a little bit about what we do with our CAO innovation community. And Dr. McGillen, may I ask you to share a little bit more in depth about that community of practice?
Happy to, Felita, thank you. We'd like to begin talking about this community by posing some of the questions that Goldstein, Hasey, and Lichtenstein pose about whether or not your institution has entered into a critical period. If you've recognized that what worked in the past isn't working anymore, if there's urgency around planning, how many strategic plans per minute can you generate at your institution? Those well-crafted plans of the past are no longer producing the fruit that they did, and you're starting to see performance declines. If any of these are true, your institution has probably entered a critical period. We have often spoken about innovation as something that all of higher education should be engaged in, but in fact, if the academic side of the house is not leading in innovation, you are going to find that the rest of the institution is going to be struggling to meet their goals as well. So next slide, Katie. You often will have individual faculty or departments who are doing wonderful and fantastic programs that are unique, but are they recognizing the fact that, in fact, none of this work happens in isolation? That actually innovation takes place within ecologies of innovation. It's a system-wide level of change, which is why so many programs that are started by one faculty member who's passionate about a particular area, or one academic staff member who cares deeply about a particular student population, dies the moment that faculty member or staff member moves on to other responsibilities. If you're not embedding it within the whole system for the institution, the change will not truly lead to innovation. In our CAO innovation community of practice, We work on a number of levels simultaneously. You will be exposed to theories of practice in higher education around theories of innovation and change, ranging from both the systemic, the organizational, all the way through the metacognitive and neuropsychological, to really understand how and why change takes place. We will work with you on building an internal team of fellow innovators. We'll help you plan a specific and significant innovation and implementation that you want to have take place at your institution. Our hope is that you're also going to be developing your institution's own capacity to work with innovation and to embrace innovation. And as I mentioned before, it will be a safe place to share and explore with other CAOs. For example, in our community just last night, when we had our CAO innovation time, we had topics that ranged from everything from difficult ethical questions around promotion and tenure decisions to some of the more perhaps mundane issues, such as how you handle credit load for your faculty. All of these are things that the individual CAOs are bringing to the table. Next slide. The three prongs of this work that we feel are the magic sauce that make this work are that you have monthly meetings around building a trusted sense of community, and it truly is a trusted community. You're going to learn a lot about improvement science and how improvement science will help you implement change, and you'll also master some cognitive and neuroscience tools that will help not only you, but your team members to develop an innovative mindset for all of this work to take place, Katie. And this happens through monthly virtual meetings. Our first virtual meeting is set for September. We hold 2 in-person meetings, one in the early in the fall, usually after the first virtual meeting, and one at the end as our culminating graduation experience in the spring. Those will take place in the beautiful hills of the Blue Ridge Mountains near Asheville, North Carolina. I'm also, we normally have a slide for this, but I did want to also note that this is not my show alone. As Dr. Williams indicated, she is also one of the key members of this team, as is Dr. Brandon Smith, Senior Associate Vice President at the Gardner Institute, and Dr. John Gardner, who I believe you will be about to hear from.
Thank you, Vicki. And so I'll just give you a little overview of the fees and the registration process for this community. So the fees for this community of practice are $9,250. That does not include, excuse me, the cost for travel and lodging for those 2 in-person meetings. And it says in 2023 and 2024, but I believe those will be in 2025 and 2026. I apologize for that. We do offer a discount to CEOs from under-resourced and underrepresented institutions. If you feel like that is your institution, just reach out to info@gardnerinstitute.org and we can further discuss that. So now I will turn that back to Felita.
Hey, thank you. Are there questions? We have time for questions. Any questions from our participants about what you've heard today? And thank you for those beautiful self-introductions. Katie, did you see any questions in the chat? I did not.
I have not. I did want to add something that we didn't mention. So
Okay.
later in the summer, in August and in September, we will be having information meetings, separate meetings about each one of these opportunities where the facilitators, and hopefully we'll have John live then and not via the phone, but the facilitators will go into a little bit more detail about what happens in the meetings and what sort of outcomes you can expect, and hopefully the opportunity to hear from some past participants. So you, by nature of registering for this, we will make sure that you receive invitations to those information sessions as well. But while we have you here today, we are happy to answer any other questions you may have.
No question too small, no question too silly. Happy to answer.
And maybe we would want to stop recording, and then as people who don't have questions leave, we can respond to any questions that other people may not want to have.
Okay.